Welcome to This Week. And this week what we're talking about is your analysis chapter, because at this stage you've collected all your data and now you need to think about it, and you've presented them in their findings chapter. Now you have to think about, well, what am I going to put in my analysis chapter? So I'm speaking to Dr. Bernadette Quinn today, so thanks for joining us, Bernadette. So let's start with, what's the difference between the findings and the analysis chapter, because sometimes people find that difficult.
Okay, yeah, well, I mean, it is a hard one. I mean, the way I look at it is, the findings chapter is, it's very descriptive. So it's what you found, you know, how many, who are they, where are they. So it's very, very descriptive. And all you've really put into your findings chapter are your findings. You know, you haven't really commented on it yourself, and neither have you gone back to your literature chapter. And now this is where the analysis differs from the findings. Once you move into your analysis chapter, now your job is to interpret those findings. Now you must be really careful not to be repeating your findings.
And that's the problem, isn't it? Often is that what you read in the analysis is the same as the findings.
Now you must really try not to do that. And I suppose the key thing is, what you're trying to do here now is to pull out what is important among those findings. So in your findings chapter you've got a great mass of data, whatever type it is, but not all of it is equally important. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to sift through those findings and figure out, well, which is important and which is not.
And what's the way of doing that? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's a skill there. So, well, it'll come from your understanding of the matter that you're studying. So if you've really, you know, gone into your lit, gone out and found something, you now are an expert on it. You're very knowledgeable on it, and you just have to trust yourself, trust your instinct. I mean, what is important? I mean, in your findings, I suppose, have people been saying similar things over and over again? Is something coming up all the time? Is something looking problematic, or is something really, you know, grasping your attention?
And it also comes down to themes, doesn't it? That we have to sort of start thinking now about exactly like what are the key issues, and also start thinking back to what you written in your lit chapter. Because to a certain extent, the findings chapter actually doesn't really bear much relation to what you did in your lit chapter.
So your findings is just this massive description, and to be honest, it can be very boring for a reader, and that is what you have to watch out for as well. In your analysis then, as you say, you're going to pull out what's important, you're going to add in your interpretation of that, and then secondly, you're going to now link it back into the lit. So what has the lit been saying, and where does your findings connect with the lit?
Absolutely.
And wherever you can find connections, that's what you're going to write about, because that's what matters.
And it's also important, isn't it? The difference is that the findings isn't going to have any references in it, because we're not referring back to anything, whereas the analysis is back to the thing about trying to tie back in what you've identified in the literature to see, are you finding the same thing or different things?
So in your findings chapter there's nothing there but findings, nothing else, whereas in the analysis chapter there's your commentary on the findings, which is new because you haven't done that in the findings chapter, plus there is the reintegration of the literature. So you'll be saying things like, as Smith 2005 wrote about in his study of tourism destinations, in Dublin we see that similar kinds of things are occurring, or dissimilar things are occurring. It doesn't really matter whether it's matching or not matching. But what matters is that you can connect your findings
back into it. Okay. And the other thing that's very important as well, isn't it, that some students miss is to bring back in the research questions, that they forget what were the research questions that I wrote in my methodology chapter. And I've seen some students quite successfully use the research questions as their headings, if you like, and then work underneath them, and that means that it's much more structured perhaps, and it provides a focus for the chapter. That can work quite well.
If you were to ask me what makes a good analysis chapter, I mean, I think that's a key thing, the structuring. Like, think of the reader. The reader has read through the findings, and possibly there's been a little bit of information overload there. And now they really need you to show them what's important, and you do this by theming your analysis, I would say. So you pull out the big themes, and then you use those as your section heads. And very often, as you say, there'll be words in there that have come from your research question, or have come from your objectives.
And it's very important, isn't it, that the analysis chapter is what makes or breaks a dissertation or a thesis. I mean, that differentiates the really good students from the not so good students. And so it's very important that students don't leave it till the end and just sort of write off, 5-10 pages of more or less repetition. That's one of the most important chapters maybe after the lit review that they pay attention to.
I mean, we're looking to see, is your work going to contribute? Is it going to contribute? It doesn't matter how large or how small, but it should add some new piece of knowledge. And this is where you're going to make it in the analysis.
And this sort of the so what question. So what is the purpose of the dissertation? What have you found that actually why did you bother doing it?
Well, this is why I've done it, because it shows me that X, Y and Z has come through. But I think one of the key problems that people find is, what goes into the findings, what goes into the analysis. And you know, that does take an awful lot of work. But if you try and kind of stick to the couple of basic rules, like the findings are just the pure description of what you found, and then don't repeat that then once you go into the analysis.
Yeah.
Don't repeat. You know, you really mustn't do that, because you'll bore the reader silly.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And that is hugely important.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a reason why in our marking structure we have different markings. You know, that the analysis is what we're marking, not just the findings when it gets to that point. Yeah.
And you know, it takes a real skill to pull out what is important, and you know, the reader's looking for that.
And it also takes time. The students need to give themselves time to work out what that analysis is.
And you know, you can only really do that well if you've engaged with your research and you've really become comfortable with what you're doing, and then it's all going to come to the fore in your analysis chapter. It'll benefit
Okay,
you.
great, thanks very much. So hopefully that will give you some helpful tips in terms of thinking about the differences between your findings and analysis chapter, and also the important thing to note is to give yourself enough time to write your analysis chapter and to engage in enough analysis so that you're getting a good mark for that section of the dissertation or thesis. See you next time.